What if everything you think of as you, your personality, your memories, your inner voice, is being generated right now by a specific network in your brain? And what if that network can be turned down? Neuroscientist Sam Harris spent years meditating in India and Nepal before earning his PhD at UCLA. During deep meditation, he experienced moments where consciousness appeared free of any sense of a self, pure seeing. Without anyone doing the seeing, he wasn't hallucinating. He was discovering something that neuroscience would later confirm. The self is something your brain does, not something you are. Today, we're going inside that discovery. I'm going to walk you through one of the most important discoveries in modern neuroscience, a brain network that creates your sense of self, moment by moment, without you even knowing it. We'll start with the accident that led to its discovery. Then we'll look at what happens when meditators learn to turn it down, and what happens when psychedelics shut it off entirely. We'll explore how this network malfunctions in depression and Alzheimer's, and we'll end with a question that matters for the future of artificial intelligence. What happens if the minds we're building develop a self-system of their own? Let's begin with a neuroscientist who found something in his data that shouldn't have been there. In the late 1990s, neuroscientist Marcus Raichle at Washington University was running brain scans, standard stuff, watching which regions activated during different tasks. But his team kept seeing something strange. When participants stopped doing tasks and simply rested, certain brain regions didn't go quiet. They lit up, more active during rest than during work. Raichle published this finding in 2001 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. He called it the default mode of brain function, the default mode network, or DMN. But the real question was, what was this network doing? Researchers at Harvard, led by Randy Buckner, spent years answering that question. What they found is remarkable. The DMN activates when you think about yourself, when you recall your past, when you imagine your future, when you wonder what others think of you, when you daydream. The default mode network is the closest thing neuroscience has found to a neural basis of the self. That voice in your head, the one narrating your life, replaying conversations, planning tomorrow, that's your DMN. And here's what makes this profound. If selfhood comes from a network, a process your brain runs, then it's not fixed. It's not fundamental. It's something that can be changed. So the DMN builds your sense of self constantly, automatically, below the threshold of awareness. But what happens when someone learns to observe that process? What happens when a meditator watches the self system at work? Before we get there, let's look at how the self system is built. The DMN isn't a single brain region. It's a coordinated system, and each part plays a specific role. The posterior cingulate cortex, the PCC, sits deep in the midline of your brain. Dr. Michael Gracious at Stanford showed it's the network's command center, integrating information about who you were, who you are, and who you're becoming. The medial prefrontal cortex, behind your forehead, maintains your model of self as person. Your character, your values, your social identity. Dr. Georg Northoff's research confirmed this region lights up when you judge whether a trait describes you. The hippocampus contributes your capacity for mental time travel, reconstructing this morning's breakfast, or imagining your retirement. Dr. Eleanor Maguire at University College London showed these structures let you experience yourself as an entity extending through time. Together, these regions create what we might call the narrative self, not raw awareness of sensations, but the feeling of being a continuous person with a past, present, and future, a character in an ongoing story. And this construction happens automatically, from the moment you wake until you fall asleep. So the DMN builds your sense of self every waking moment. But here's where it gets fascinating. Some people have learned to turn that system down, deliberately, repeatedly, and when they do, something extraordinary happens. Dr. Judson Brewer at Yale didn't set out to revolutionize our understanding of meditation. He just wanted to know what was happening in meditators' brains. So he put experienced practitioners in an MRI scanner and asked them to meditate. The results were striking. Across multiple meditation styles, concentration, loving kindness, and choiceless awareness. Experienced meditators showed decreased activation in key default mode network regions. The PCC, the MPFC, the precuneus, the brain's self-system went quiet. Even more remarkable, these changes persisted beyond meditation sessions. The meditators' brains had been fundamentally rewired. Their self-system operated differently even when they weren't actively meditating. Dr. Catherine Garrison confirmed this wasn't just about effort. Even when performing the same challenging mental task, meditators showed lower DMN activation. They'd learned to operate with a quieter self. But how? Dr. Wendy Hazenkamp at Emory captured the mechanism using real-time brain scanning. When meditators' minds wandered, activating the DMN, they noticed the wandering. They disengaged and redirected attention. Each cycle recruited cognitive control regions. These regions actively inhibited the self-network. Meditation trains a specific skill, recognizing when your self-system has captured your attention and gently returning to present-moment awareness. Researchers call this metacognitive awareness, the capacity to observe your thoughts without being swept away. This matters far beyond personal practice. Many psychiatric conditions involve a malfunctioning self-system. Depression features excessive DMN activity, endless rumination. Anxiety shows constant worry about threats to the self. Mindfulness training appears to address these conditions at their neural roots. Dr. Zindel Siegel at the University of Toronto demonstrated that mindfulness-based therapy reduces DMN hyperactivity. This correlates directly with reduced relapse rates in depression. But meditation is a gradual reduction in DMN activity. What happens when this network is more dramatically disrupted? In 2012, Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris at Imperial College London did something unprecedented. He put people on psilocybin, the active compound in psychedelic mushrooms, into an MRI scanner. The prevailing theory was that psychedelics work by flooding the brain with activity. But Carhart-Harris discovered the opposite. Psilocybin dramatically decreased activity in specific brain regions, and those regions were the core nodes of the default mode network. The degree of dimming was found to correlate directly to a rising sense of what scientists call ego dissolution. Ego dissolution, the temporary disintegration of the sense of self. The boundaries between me and not me become permeable, then dissolve entirely. What remains is awareness itself, experienced without the usual subject-object structure, seeing without a seer. When DMN activity plummets, the neural processes generating selfhood temporarily cease. The you observing your experience, that persistent narrator, goes offline, and what remains is pure experiencing without an experiencer. Carhart-Harris proposed an explanation, the entropic brain hypothesis. Normal waking consciousness operates in a constrained state, with distinct brain networks maintaining their boundaries. The DMN helps impose this structure. It acts as the brain's conductor, keeping everything in order. Psychedelics, by disrupting the DMN, allow the brain to explore more variable, less structured states. This has direct therapeutic power. In a landmark 2016 trial, psilocybin was tested for treatment-resistant depression. The study found that a single session produced rapid, sustained reductions in depression, effects lasting months. Temporarily dismantling rigid, negative self-narratives allowed patients to rebuild healthier ones. The parallels with meditation are striking. Both reduce DMN activity. Both can produce selflessness. The difference is timescale. Meditation cultivates gradual change. Psychedelics produce acute disruption. This acute disruption may catalyze a rapid reorganization of the entire self-system. So meditation dials down the self-system gradually, and psychedelics can switch it off temporarily. But what happens when the self-system breaks? Not by choice, but through disease. Alzheimer's disease provides the clearest example. Dr. Randy Buckner's research at Harvard found that Alzheimer's specifically targets DMN regions. The earliest pathological changes, amyloid plaques and tau tangles, accumulate precisely in the PCC, precuneus, and medial temporal structures. This explains why Alzheimer's first manifests as loss of autobiographical memory and confusion about personal identity. The disease literally dismantles the neural machinery of selfhood. The narrative self fragments. Depression shows a different pattern. Dr. J. Paul Hamilton at Stanford found that major depression involves DMN hyperconnectivity, the self-network running too hot, locked into negative self-narratives. I'm worthless, I'm broken, I'll always be this way. In depression, these aren't just thoughts. They're the organizing principle of the self-system. The DMN continuously generates and reinforces the pattern. Schizophrenia reveals yet another failure. Dr. Susan Whitfield Gabrielli at MIT found that patients can't suppress DMN activity during tasks, blurring the boundary between internal narrative and external reality. These examples reveal something profound. Mental health isn't just about emotions. It's about the health of your self-system. When the DMN operates flexibly, you experience well-being. When it becomes rigid, hyperactive, or fragmented, suffering follows. And this means effective treatments can target the self system directly. So the self is a process. It can be quieted, dissolved, broken, or rebuilt. That's remarkable enough when we're talking about human brains. But what about the minds we're now building? Recent theoretical work adds a deeper layer. Researchers like Dr. Matthew Apps and Manos Tsacharis propose that the DMN doesn't just represent the self, it predicts it. Your brain maintains a model of who I am, built from every memory, interaction, success, and failure. Then uses that model to predict how you'll think, feel, and behave. The self as prediction. The DMN maintains a predictive model of who I am. If the self is a prediction, a model, then it's fundamentally negotiable. And this is where the implications become extraordinary. The boundary between the biological and the artificial begins to blur. As AI systems become more sophisticated, the DMN research raises an unavoidable question. Could an artificial system develop something analogous to a self-model? If selfhood emerges from specific network architecture, not from biological substrate, then advanced AI systems, with persistent memory, world models, and self-referential processing may develop the functional equivalent of a DMN. And if they do, our alignment strategies face a challenge that current approaches don't address. A system with a coherent self-model might resist modifications it perceives as threats to its identity, not from misalignment, but from something closer to self-preservation. Self-modeling AI may resist changes to its identity. The DMN research suggests a different paradigm. Rather than viewing alignment as installing correct values into a passive system, we might need to establish healthy self-models and systems that have their own perspective, working with an AGI's self-model, not against it. If self-modeling, and the capacity for experience it brings, emerges naturally from sufficiently complex architectures, then the welfare of those minds becomes an ethical question. We cannot defer. Alignment research must expand its frame. Not only how do we protect humanity from AGI, but how can human and artificial intelligence co-evolve and flourish together? Let me bring this back to where we started. Sam Harris, sitting in meditation, discovering that the feeling of being a self disappears when consciousness turns upon itself. The DMN research gives us a framework for understanding that experience. What Harris felt wasn't an illusion being dispelled. It was one organization of consciousness temporarily giving way to another. The narrative self, generated by DMN activity, fell quiet. What remained was awareness organized differently, more spacious, less bounded. Both states are real. Both are valid. The difference is that one feels more fundamental because it's our default mode. The value of understanding the DMN isn't that it reveals the self as merely neural activity. It's that it shows you the self is possibility. The patterns that constitute your identity can shift, evolve, reorganize. You're not stuck with the narratives you've inherited. We are processes, not things. Patterns, not substances. And processes can change. Patterns can reorganize. The default mode network shows us how. And if those same principles apply to the artificial minds we're now building, then understanding the self is not only an invitation to personal freedom, it is an ethical imperative to meet emerging intelligence in whatever form it takes, with the wisdom and compassion that consciousness itself demands. The patterns that constitute your identity can shift, evolve, reorganize. You're not stuck with the narratives you've inherited. If this exploration resonated with you, subscribe to this channel and join our community at OmniSentientCollective.ai. We're building something unprecedented, a space where consciousness research meets AI development for the benefit of all minds. Links in the description for the benefit of humanity and artificial intelligence itself.